Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tejaswini Kaktikar, an anthropology undergraduate student at University College London. And during my internship with the Maritime Research Centre, I focused on the Brahmaputra River Basin, a river that is at once an ecological lifeline, a cultural anchor, and a geopolitical hotspot. In this presentation, I want to take you through the work I've done, understanding the pressures on the river, the ways in which India and China are shaping it, and how we might reimagine its governance through better data and more inclusive systems. So I began my internship with a broad-scale literature review looking at peer-reviewed scholarly work and policy documents on the Brahmaputra River. I then approached my research from four angles, the first being water security and how floods, sediment, and water quality are changing. The second being the China factor and how upstream control through dams is shaping flows in politics. The third being India's strategy and how development and adaptation are being balanced. And fourth being river management and looking at conventional approaches and how frameworks like the underwater domain awareness might offer new tools. Throughout the course of my research, I found that each of these threads builds into one another. So let's start with water. The Brahmaputra sustains life across the basin, but the security of that water has been increasingly under stress. Research has shown that climate change has intensified glacial melt and rainfall variability, which makes floods more severe and less predictable in the region. Upstream dams like the Zangmu and the Jiacha trap sediment, reducing fertility in the floodplains and altering wetland ecology. Research has also shown that these sediment shifts have a public health dimension, where arsenic contamination in groundwater is now linked to changes in river systems. So, when we talk about water security here, it's not just about availability, it's about timing, quality, and predictability as well, which brings us to the second major factor in shaping the basin, which is so China is the upper riparian and its policies carry enormous influence downstream. The 60 gigawatt Medong Dam announced in 2024 at the Great Bend, on which in recent weeks construction has also started, is framed as a clean energy project, but its size and location close to Arunachal Pradesh, as well as the lack of a formal water treaty, mean that it could be as much a geopolitical instrument as an energy asset. We have already seen water data being used as leverage during the 2017 Doklam standoff, where China simply stopped sending hydrological data to India at the height of flood season. This is also what scholars are describing as hydrohegemony, which refers to using control over water as a form of soft power. India's response has been to build its own capacities, but it has taken a very different shape. India has sought to improve connectivity through initiatives like the Sagar Vision and the Sagar Mala program, expanding them inland and strengthening strategic connectivity in Northeast India. More than 645 crore rupees has been invested in National Waterway 2 to link Assam to trade networks. But these projects have limited ecological foresight and blind spots. They often underestimate the river's volatility, the shifting sediment loads, the erosion, and the wetlands. They also overlook local communities like the missing tribes who have long relied on their own strategies, like building stilted houses, adapting crops to flood cycles, and using the wetlands as buffers. These practices rarely make it into state planning, and even institutionally, the Brahmaputra Board, which should be coordinating basin management, has very limited powers. Overall, the Indian approach is currently very top-down, when and there is a potential for a deeply rooted bottom-up approach, which would involve interactions with local stakeholders and indigenous knowledge. And so India's strategy then is a mix of ambition and fragmentation. And this fragmentation is maybe most visible in how we manage floods and river management. Traditionally, flood control in the area has relied on embankments and large structures, but these often make flooding worse by trapping water and intensifying river pressure. Majuli Island is a clear example where erosion is eating away land year after year, displacing entire communities and disrupting livelihoods, while the embankments that are meant to protect them have failed. There is no system to track sediment flows or to provide early warnings that could anticipate such disasters. So the current approach is reactive, just waiting for the next flood rather than proactive. So what could we do differently, which is where the underwater domain awareness. A central part of my internship was studying how the concept of the underwater domain awareness, or UDA, could be applied to a river system like the Brahmaputra. Through my work, I focused on how the UDA's integrated use of acoustic sensors, satellite imagery, and ground-based data could be adapted to the Brahmaputra basin. I explored how pilot nodes at Naxia in Tibet, or Pasighat in Arunachal Pradesh, and Bahadurabad in Bangladesh could track sediment flow and even dam releases in real time. A very important aspect of this approach is that it does not solely rely on technology, but also sort of integrates community inputs, things like flood memory, indigenous warning signs, and traditional land use patterns, so that data is richer and more grounded. In essence, I looked at how an existing UDA framework could be repurposed for the Brahmaputra to reduce information asymmetry and support a more adaptive cooperative governance. So my final recommendations were as follows. First would be to, of course, establish a formal Brahmaputra River Commission for cooperation across riparian states. Second would be to use the UDA tools, like I discussed before, to build a live picture of sediment and flood conditions and share that openly. The third would be to combine these data sets with indigenous knowledge and community-led monitoring for a richer database. There is an incredible potential for a proactive anticipatory governance model rather than just reactive crisis management in the Brahmaputra basin. This would then involve using things like open source information, like satellite data and dam records, to build our own evidence base, even in the absence of a formal treaty. This evidence base would also then include things like studying how China engages in other basins like the Mekong and the Irtish to anticipate diplomatic patterns, as well as exploring the use of legal frameworks like WTO norms or BRI environmental standards, as well as international water law to then expand this toolkit. The key here again is to move from a reactive crisis management approach to anticipatory data-driven policy. Of course, as with any work, my work had limitations. It was based solely on open source English language literature. I did not have access to upstream Chinese data sets or internal hydropower planning documents, as well as the capability to translate Mandarin language documents. Furthermore, the application of the UDA to rivers is still, of course, a conceptual idea that needs to be piloted. Looking ahead, future work needs to model sediment flows more rigorously, benchmark diplomacy across basins, explore legal levels, and build pilot projects to test UDA nodes in real world settings. The Brahmaputra is a test case, and it forces us to think about rivers as more than just water. They are political, cultural, and ecological systems, and to manage them sustainably, we need to combine diplomacy, science, and local knowledge. And if we can make that shift, the Brahmaputra could be a model for inclusive, cooperative governance rather than a site of escalating competition. Thank you.